Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in this world. This is John West, back with you with Japanese Business and Economy. Yes, John West back with you with Japanese Business and Economy. We're going to start Class 7 in this presentation, so this will be Class 7A. We're going to be looking at the Womenomics solution to Japan's economic challenges. Now, as we've been talking about in many classes, Japan has a rapidly aging population. The working age population is declining. This is dragging the economy down. However, women, who make up half the population, have traditionally played a limited direct role in the economy. So many people, like former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, have called for offering women greater opportunity to help solve Japan's labour shortages and economic challenges. Now, this is very important, this idea, because COVID-19, the crisis we're in the middle of now, has highlighted the importance of women leaders. Countries with women leaders have actually done better in managing the coronavirus. Look at this photo here. You see Angela Merkel from Germany. You see the New Zealand Prime Minister, the Taiwanese Prime Minister, and others. So in short, if we want to make a better world, women should be allowed to work more. But fundamentally, womenomics is a human rights issue, in my view. If women would like to work, they should not be prevented from doing so. It should be part of their freedom. Now, there are at least two ways of interpreting the role of women in traditional Japanese society and economy. One interpretation would be that there was a strict division of labour between men and women. Women were in charge of the home and the family, and men went to the office, to factories or farms. So not a hierarchy between the two, but a strict division of labour. The other interpretation would be that Japan has a male-dominated society where men are in charge and women are in a subordinate position. In reality, I think there is some truth in both of these interpretations. It would be too simplistic to adhere to one of those interpretations. Now, the Japanese women typically manage the household budget. It's a very important task they do still today. And also Japanese women managing the budget are also well known for being investors.
It's a payday for Yoshihiro Nozawa. As well as a homemade lunchbox, his wife gives him a monthly pocket money of 30,000 yen, or just over $350. Despite being the breadwinner, that's all the money his wife will let him spend on himself over the next 30 days. I started controlling the household budget when I became a housewife after having children. Their educations and private lessons cost a lot, so we've decided that it's easier for him to be on a fixed allowance. I try to ease his burden by making him a lunchbox. Lunchtime is usually a solitary affair, and even though it's a sunny summer day, Mr. Nozawa says his life can get a bit dull. His only luxury are cigarettes after lunch, which he spends 1/3 of his pocket money on. Well, Mr. Nozawa might be eating his lunch alone, but in fact, he's not unique. 3/4 of Japanese household budgets are controlled by women, and making matters worse for the men is the fact that the average amount of their pocket money has halved since the early 1990s. Just as Japan's economic conditions have tightened, so have the country's purse strings. Older couples are also feeling the pinch. 47-year-old Taisa Kubo has been getting just over $600 a month from his wife for the past 15 years. And just like in the rest of the business world, he has to try and negotiate a pay rise each year. But despite his best efforts, His wife makes a counter-presentation explaining why it can't be done. The realities of the bottom line played out a long way from the office.
毎年ちょこちょこ上げるように
When she starts drawing a pie chart of our household budget, there's no way I can win the argument. I've given up my car, motorbike, and many expensive hobbies.
There's one thing he has managed to keep hold of, and that's his drinking budget. But even that has shrunk. On average, Japanese businessmen now spend less than $40 a night to lift their spirits, which is almost half of what they used to spend just 3 years ago. Luckily, though, they still seem to have enough cash in their pockets to put a smile on their faces. Marie Boy, BBC News, Tokyo.
So a charming little report, but this highlights a reality in Japan that Japanese men and Japanese women do have a strict division of labor between the family and the office, and that in most Japanese families it is the woman who manages the budget. And in fact, a majority of Japanese wives hand out a pocket money to their husband. And it looks a little bit amusing in a way in the report, but this is the reality. And so for people who think that Japanese women are in a weak position in Japanese society, I think this is a very important report to look at and think about. Now, as I said a moment ago, Japanese women not only manage the household budget, they're also well known as investors. And the Japanese woman investor is usually referred to as Mrs. Watanabe.
This is Etsuko Somea, married for 8 years with a young child. But in Forex markets, she's known as Mrs. Watanabe, one of hundreds of thousands of retail investors in Japan trading currencies. Many of them are housewives, and they are sophisticated, using technical analysis just like professionals do. Etsuko herself earns $12,000 a month from trading.
I will fix a time and will trade only within that time frame. The other times, I will spend doing my chores and playing with my son.
Retail investors are a big factor in currency markets. They make up almost a third of daily spot yen trading, and many trade on margins. In fact, they were a key factor in sending the yen to a record on March 17th when they slashed their long positions in dollar yen. Some of these Mrs. Watanabes have become so famous, they're considered celebrities by the Japanese public. In fact, for many, this crisis provides an opportunity to boost positions on high-yield currencies. Meet kimono trader Yukiko Ikebe, a mother of 3 and an investor with 40 years of experience. She's concealing her face because she fears for her life, having made what she says is millions of dollars trading currencies. On the day the yen hit a record, Yukiko spotted an opportunity in the Aussie yen.
I started with a short position from 80 yen, and it fell all the way to the 74 yen level. I shorted with a difference of 5 yen. The next day, it started to level around 77 to 70, so I bought back in. Since the short position was a difference of 5 yen, if you had put in 100,000 yen, that would be a profit of 500,000 yen.
As Japan continues to watch the yen, analysts say the activity from retail traders will be crucial.
The amount of trading volume and interest from retail investors towards currencies and overseas assets will likely grow from here.
And that's especially the case since carry trades are back in vogue as central banks flood the system with liquidity. Yukiko is now looking at the Aussie and the South African rand. That's in contrast to a Reuters poll of analysts that expect both the currencies to weaken over the next 6 months. Unlike professionals who use complicated models for their forecasts, Yukiko opts for her own strategy.
They are one of the few economies in the world that are 200% self-sufficient. That's a wonderful thing. So I traveled to both and saw with my own eyes whether I should buy their currencies.
As Japan continues to rebuild from the earthquake, Mrs. Watanabe will not only play a crucial role in currency markets, but also as the wives, mothers, and citizens of a nation in crisis. Kei Okamura, Reuters, Tokyo.
So once again, a charming little story, and even though it's a little bit old, it still reflects the reality of today. And the important point is that in the household, and when it comes to family budget, Japanese women are very powerful. Now, coming back to the a key point of what we want to talk about, there is this strict division of labor between men and women in Japan. Men go to the office, the factory, or the farm, women at home. This strict division of labor no longer makes any sense. Today, Japanese women are very well educated. Many would prefer to work rather than spend all their time in the house with the family. And because of Japan's aging population, Japan has labor shortages. So women should have a right to work, and if women can work more, this is very good for the economy. Now, notwithstanding these arguments in favor of giving women greater opportunity in the economy and in society, Japan is ranked 121 out of 153 countries in the Global Gender Gap Report of the World Economic Forum. Let me repeat, 121st out of 153 countries in the Global Gender Gap Report. This is a terrible figure, really. Now, the Global Gender Gap Report is based on gaps between men and women for economic participation and opportunity, the economy, education attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. Now, Japan's position of 121 out of 153 is way out of sync for a country whose GDP per capita is among the world's top 30. Japan should be doing better. Now, Japan is well below many, many countries, as we mentioned. For example, Iceland is number one, comes first. Norway, Finland, Sweden, they are the top 4 countries. Then Germany, France. In Asia, the top country is the Philippines at 16th. UK, 21st. Trinidad and Tobago. I think we have some students from this country in our class. Trinidad and Tobago, 24th. Mexico, 25th. More students from Mexico. Australia, my country, 44th. Not good enough. Bangladesh, 50th. Again, we have some students from Bangladesh. US, 53rd. Singapore, Indonesia. Again, we have students from Indonesia. China, Korea, India, then Japan, then 142nd, Cote d'Ivoire. Now, Japan scores very poorly, in particular, for political empowerment. What this means is that there are very few Japanese women in the parliament or in ministerial positions. Japanese women also score very poorly for economic participation and opportunity. Now, even though Japan is ranked very low for Womenomics, labour force participation for Japanese women has actually risen in recent years in response to the labour shortages. As you can see in this chart, labour force participation for Japanese women now exceeds that of the US and the OECD average. So look at this chart, you see the purple line, and for the purple line was around or below the OECD average for lots of the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. And what's happened is, over the last decade or so, the participation rate for Japanese women has gone up quite sharply, overtaking the OECD average and overtaking the US. And of course, this is because of the labour shortages that we have in Japan. People need to have workers to fill positions, and Japanese women are now filling an increasing number of positions. Now, the quantity of jobs that women have, the quantity of Japanese women in the workforce is high, but the quality of their participation in the economy is much, much lower. This is a key point we have to think about. Although the quantity of jobs and quantity of Japanese women in the economy is high, the quality of their situation is much lower. So the first point I want to highlight here in this chart is the gender wage gap in OECD countries. This is the gap between women's wages and men's wages for the same type of job. And overall, men in all countries, or most countries, earn more than women for the same type of job. But out of the 35 or so OECD countries, Japan is third last. It has the third highest gender wage gap. Korea, Estonia are higher, then comes Japan with the third highest gender wage gap. So Japanese women, poor Japanese women, are earning much less than their male counterparts for the same job. Now, one of the reasons why Japanese women are earning less than men is that a lot of the jobs that Japanese women have are non-regular jobs. They might be part-time jobs or casual jobs or short-term contract jobs. And you can see in these charts here, on the left-hand side, we have men aged 15 and above. The blue part of the column is men with regular jobs. The green is non-regular jobs. On the right-hand side, we have women aged 15 and over. And you see there that the green part, the non-regular jobs, is much, much bigger for women. So we've spoken a bit in our course about this phenomenon of non-regular jobs, of short-term jobs, casual jobs, and so on. And it's highly concentrated among women. And so women have more risky, more precarious jobs than men do on average. And they have lower paid jobs. Another thing that is that we need to look at is the fact that many women are actually leaving work due to the need to look after aging relatives. And so you see here in this chart on the left-hand side, people leaving jobs due to long-term nursing care by gender. So when it comes to who leaves work to look after aging relatives, aging family members, it's women who are leaving work more than men. And so the burden of looking after the family, this is falling on women. Now, these charts here, again, are very important. The first chart shows the female share of managerial employment. Now, in all countries, there are less women than men in managerial positions. Less women are bosses. But in Japan, it has the worst or second worst situation of all the OECD countries. So the share of Japanese women in management positions is the second lowest among OECD countries. So there are more and more Japanese women working, but very few of them are bosses. The second part of the chart shows the share of women on the seats of corporate boards, the boards that run or direct companies. And so again, very, very few Japanese women are actually on corporate boards. Corporate boards, they're a male affair in Japan. And the last part of the chart there, this shows the share of women in the parliament, or the diet, as we call it in Japan. And so the share of women in the parliament in Japan is the lowest of all the OECD countries. And so even though we saw earlier that women are managing the coronavirus better than men leaders, in Japan, very few women are in the parliament and very few women have cabinet positions. Again, this is a very interesting chart. So the top part of the chart shows us the female share of all graduates in engineering, manufacturing, and construction. Again, Japan is bottom of the ladder for the OECD. The share of women studying engineering, manufacturing, and construction is the lowest of all the OECD countries. And so what this shows us really is that there's a gender identification of jobs. Men do certain jobs, women do other jobs. And that there's it's much harder for a woman to do a job which is considered to be a men's job. Now, looking down at the second part of this, the share of doctors who are women in the OECD. And so, again, Japan has the lowest share of doctors who are women. And this is particularly shocking because in many OECD countries, actually there are more women than men who are doctors. It's considered to be a very family-friendly type of position. And so in many OECD countries, more women doctors than men doctors. But in Japan, very few women are doctors. So again, we have this discrimination between men and women, and we have this identification of certain jobs being male jobs, other jobs being female jobs. And so, you know, I'm sure that there are many Japanese women who, in their heart of hearts, would like to become a doctor, but for cultural reasons, find it very difficult to do so. Now, as I said earlier, Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan until September last year, he launched a program called Abenomics to revitalize the Japanese economy. And Womenomics has been at the heart of Abenomics. And of course, all of the information that we've been talking about, all of the low quality participation of women in the labor market, this is at the heart of Womenomics, trying to make women or give them the opportunity to be more equal to men. And so Mr. Abe set targets for the participation and advancement of women in the workforce. Let's do better. That's our goal. Mr. Abe encouraged the private sector to promote more women and provide data on the advancement of women, to let people know how many women are working in senior positions. In government, Mr. Abe recruited and promoted women. He increased daycare and after-school care. He expanded childcare benefits, and he reviewed somewhat the tax and social security system. So Mr. Abe's program of Abenomics, with Womenomics being a key part of it, actually did try to make some progress. And some progress had been made, but quite frankly, not enough progress has been made. And in Japan, Womenomics is still work in progress. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Kathy Matsui, who invented over 20 years ago the concept of Womenomics.
The concept of womenomics is the combination of the word women and economics. In other words, how societies here in Japan, around the world, can harness half the population to boost long-term economic growth. The genesis of this concept really came about a few years after I'd given birth to my first child. I noticed that after I had returned from maternity leave back to work, quite a number of my Japanese friends were not returning to their workplaces to the same degree. Knowing what I knew back then, which was that Japan was facing already 20 years ago a very severe demographic challenge with an aging population, declining birth rate, finally realizing that, hey, wait a minute, we have half the population that isn't fully participating in Japan's workplace. What if we tap into that half the population a little bit more, and let's see what that could do to the economy. Today, we are actually seeing a lot more women participating in the workplace. There are a number of very specific factors that have helped drive this increased participation. It has to be said that 6 years ago, when Prime Minister Abe launched his national growth strategy, he actually incorporated Womenomics as a core pillar. Point number two, a number of policy changes were actually affected that helped encourage more and more women to work. So for instance, the government really had a campaign to increase the number of spots for children who were waiting to get into public daycare. In 2016, the Prime Minister's Cabinet Office declared that big companies had to disclose gender-related statistics and also set targets for gender goals. Investors around the world are now paying a lot more attention. How are companies scoring when it comes to these metrics? So while we have made considerable progress, there are still many challenges left. For instance, Parliament in Japan is still very underrepresented by females. I would, for example, advocate, even on a temporary basis, instituting quotas in the public sector because we need the input to forming those policies coming from a more representative leadership. Second, we really need to tackle this issue of part-time work versus full-time work. The good news is the numbers are up of Japanese women participating in the workplace. The bad news is there's still a very stark gap in gender pay, partly related to the fact that a lot of these women are working in part-time as opposed to full-time roles. And I think the final issue that the society needs to tackle is up here, about stereotypical gender roles, about resolving unconscious biases. If I consider 20 years ago, I have to say that I can't not avoid but be optimistic about Japan's future. Sure, it's taken quite a long time for the issue and the topic to really gain traction, but I think we're seeing the government, private sector, and society finally coming together kind of as a triad and cooperating because they understand that this is an economic imperative.
So an excellent presentation by Kathy Matsui, the inventor of Womenomics. As she said, it's very impressive that Prime Minister Abe adopted Womenomics as a key plank of his Abenomics program, and that his government actually implemented a number of reforms, and that there has been some progress made. But the reality is, it's still work in progress. We haven't had enough progress made, and although we see increasing numbers of Japanese women working, the reality is that the quality of this work is much lower than it should be. Many Japanese women have part-time or short-time jobs. They are underpaid compared with men, and so on. As Kathy Matsui said, a key factor in the Womenomics challenge is changing mindsets. In fact, changing mindsets among Japanese men. And here's an interesting little YouTube for you about a Japanese cabinet minister, Labour minister, who insists that women should wear high heels.
Attention business owners. To help you through the current situation, we're offering you a free copy of Chris Cardell's book, 77 Ways to Get More Customers.
It's shocking to see that a cabinet minister should have such a sexist attitude towards Japanese women and wearing high heels at work. Here is another, even more shocking story about Tokyo Medical School, it's not the only one, admitting to the fact that it has been lowering women's scores as they seek to get admitted to the medical school. What they are doing is disadvantaging deliberately women's scores to make it easier for men to get in.
A scandal that shook Japan and revealed a deep-seated discrimination against women. The most prestigious medical school in Japan, Tokyo Medical University, has admitted that since 2006, it has been secretly decreasing the marks scored by female candidates at its entrance exam. Behind this manipulation, a desire to restrict the number of women doctors, as they are likely to stop working when they become mothers.
It's sad that they cheated like that and changed the marks behind our backs. There are candidates that have sacrificed a lot for their future.
I've witnessed inequality ever since I started university. There are far fewer girls than boys in my class. It's strange. We cannot go on like this.
The university's former president and other high-ranking officials have been indicted. The medical school rejected our request for an interview, as did most of its students. In Japan, criticizing one's university can lead to negative repercussions, but one of the students finally accepted to speak to us anonymously.
Mostly, I feel anger. Anger towards the injustice done to female candidates. And it also puts us, men, in an embarrassing position. We've passed the entrance exam, joined the ranks of the university, but here we are now maybe taking the place of a woman who deserved to be here. So now it's like we owe these women something. Our university used to claim that diversity was their motto, but now we can't trust them anymore.
The Japanese government has launched an inquiry to look into similar hidden quotas against women in medical universities all over the country. We met with the official leading this investigation. He claims to be working day and night to cast light on this scandal.
All the other medical schools say they don't cheat, but in most of these universities, when we compare the results, male candidates have much better results than the female candidates. So it is strange. I've also had to take difficult exams, and I worked hard because I trusted the system. So I'd like to apologize to all of these women, not in the name of the ministry, but on my personal behalf.
Authorities are willing to make amends through financial compensation and even reintegrating the affected candidates. At the root of this injustice is the shortage of doctors in public hospitals. The long working hours make life difficult for female doctors when they become mothers. As a young doctor, Tomoko worked in a public hospital for several years before starting her own clinic.
We used to work day and night. My children were very small, and it was very hard to work such long hours. I had many responsibilities and a lot of pressure.
Today, Tomoko has almost 60 patients per day, but her schedule is more flexible. In Japan's patriarchal society, it is a woman's job to take care of the children. Hiring a nanny is frowned upon. So once they become mothers, many Japanese women are forced to quit their jobs, especially in the most competitive sectors.
One of my friends was fired from the hospital. She had a first child, and when she told her boss about her desire to have a second one, she wasn't even pregnant. She was told that there was no need for her to come back to work. Men can work freely. I can continue to work because I have a certain amount of freedom. But because of housework and family responsibilities, it's true that it's difficult to always be 100% at the hospital.
This is exactly what led the medical school to impose these quotas. The traditionalists see it as an attempt to respond to a real problem.
I understand the hospital's point of view. It is a reality that many women leave their job when they become mothers. Imagine what would happen if in a hospital, all the female doctors were pregnant at the same time and took their maternity leave at the same time.
Do women have to sacrifice their professional life to have children, or is it the state's job to find a solution? Since the bombshell investigation, several lawyers and activists have been working together to put pressure on the authorities.
やっぱりさ、いいよ、それね。そうでもないとね、一人二人じゃやっぱね。
この問題っていうのは、すごい日本社会。
It is not just the university's problem. This discrimination is at the very core of Japanese society. By fighting it, there is a possibility that we can change society.
日本社会って変わっていくのかなというふうに思っています。
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has made women's employment one of the key issues of his program, but inequalities still prevail. Last year, Japan dropped to the 114th position in gender equality rankings.
Another fascinating report on how Tokyo Medical School was cheating young women who were trying to be admitted into medical studies. Now, we saw a few moments ago how the number of women who are doctors in Japan, it's the lowest share, the lowest ratio of all the OECD countries. All the other OECD countries have a bigger share of women as doctors. And this is obviously one of the reasons why Japanese women are being cheated as they're applying for admission to medical schools. Now, is there a case for optimism when it comes to womenomics in Japan? Kathy Matsui in the video a few moments ago said yes. I think maybe there is a case for some optimism. Firstly, labour shortages in Japan are pushing Japan to take women more seriously. So there is an economic imperative involved. Secondly, and fundamentally, Japan must decide whether it wants a thriving and rich economy and society or not. And women are key to this. Women are key to a rich and prosperous Japan. Another factor is that ESG investors take gender seriously. Investors who are concerned about environment, society, and governance are taking gender seriously. And so on the financial markets, Japan has to be much more serious. Lastly, Japanese millennials, Japanese young boys have much more progressive attitudes than their parents. And I see this myself when I'm teaching young Japanese boys. But there's lots more to be done. Now, in fact, what we need, and Kathy Matsui made this point herself, we need systemic changes involving government, business, and society. There is no one solution. The whole system in Japan needs to change. And some of the elements are the following. At the government level, the government needs to fix the shortages at daycare facilities. It should fix the tax distortions that discourage women from working. And above all, the government should lead by example, perhaps by employing gender quotas and having more Japanese women in the parliament and in the ministry. At the business level, business should see the value in gender diversity, as business in other parts of the world do, notably in Scandinavia, where women have a much more important role in business. And of course, business should have a more family-friendly working environment, again, which is possible, as you can see, in Scandinavia. And families themselves should become more family-friendly, with men chipping in and helping their wives as much as possible. Now, another thing which I think is relevant is that if Japan were more open to foreign investment, this could also help, because Western companies, I'm sure, would greatly appreciate Japan's talented women. And this would give the women more opportunity, and it would demonstrate to the Japanese companies themselves the potential of womenomics. Another point which I think is very important is that more open immigration policies could enable Japanese families to hire a maid from the Philippines or Vietnam. At the moment, Japan's immigration policies are very strict with regard to hiring maids. Women's entrepreneurship is another field where Japanese women can have great opportunity. And there are some private initiatives which are promising. Women in Technology Japan, for example, has the vision to bring more women into the technology field and grow the next generation of technology leaders. And there's another one, Startup Lady Japan, is promoting entrepreneurship as a solution to break outside of the constraints of traditional corporate culture and give women the choice, lifestyle, and financial independence they need. So fundamentally, I think the key thing is we need new mentalities and mindsets. And if people have a more modern, progressive mindset, lots of things can change. Role models and women's leadership can help too. But of course, this needs a help at the top level. Also, women themselves must learn to fight for womenomics. We have to think back about how the women's liberation movement in the West was back in the 60s and 70s. It were women themselves pushing for womenomics in the West. But for young Japanese girls, if they are thinking about which way to go in their lives, how do they have a more dynamic role in business and society, there are actually many inspirational Japanese women like Kathy Matsui. And so let me introduce you to the 10 most inspirational Japanese women. Firstly, there is Akiko Naka. She's the first female Japanese entrepreneur to run a company listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Kimi Iwata. She's been an advocate for gender equality in the workplace for a few decades now. And she was a former vice president at Shiseido and worked at other companies like Kirin and Japan Airlines. Dr. Chieko Asakawa, she went blind at the age of 14 and then dedicated her career to improving the lives of the visually impaired by developing technology to help them. Ari Hori, she's revered for setting up Women's Startup Lab based in Silicon Valley. And then there's Mariko Tokioka. She's a global entrepreneur with several ventures under her belt. Emi Takamura is a serial entrepreneur who founded Future Edu, a community focused on advancing educational opportunities in Japan. Yoshiko Shinohara is Japan's first self-made billionaire, having established a recruitment agency called Temp Holdings several decades ago. Then there is Tomoko Namba. She's the founder and chairman of Dina, a prominent mobile gaming and technology company in Japan. Mari Murata is the founder of Imio, an online platform launched in 2013 that offers user-curated interior design service. And lastly, there is Naomi Kurihara, co-founder and CEO of Infostellar, a company that connects owners of satellites with owners of antenna. So as hard as it is for Japanese ladies to succeed in Japanese business, government and society, these 10 women have succeeded, and they should be a source of inspiration for any ambitious young Japanese woman. And I encourage any Japanese woman who is interested in a career in business or government to meet with or learn about these inspirational Japanese women. So that brings us to an end for this short lecture on Japan's Womenomics solution. And of course, in Japan, where we have an aging and declining workforce, where we have weak productivity and we have a big government debt, Womenomics can be part of the solution to Japan's problems. And the government has been working in a positive direction, but not enough has yet been achieved. And there's much more that can be done. But Womenomics is a key part of the solution for Japan's challenges. So thank you once again for joining me for this short lecture on Womenomics as a solution for Japan's challenges. I look forward to seeing you next time And so for the moment, let me say sayonara.